The Leicestershire Yeomanry was a yeomanry regiment of the British Army, first raised in 1794 and again in 1803, which provided cavalry and mounted infantry in the Second Boer War and the First World War, and provided 2 field artillery regiments of the Royal Artillery in the Second World War, before being amalgamated with the Derbyshire Yeomanry into forming the Leicestershire and Derbyshire Yeomanry in 1957. The regiment's lineage is currently perpetuated by B Squadron of the Royal Yeomanry. History. Original formation. During the crisis of 1794, when there were grave fears of a French invasion, the government pressed for the formation of volunteer corps across the country, and in April 1794, letters were circulated to the Lords Lieutenant of each county instructing them to raise regiments of yeomanry. In Leicestershire, a meeting was held at the Three Crowns Inn in Leicester on the 10th of April, where the details were organised and a list of subscribers who were willing to provide funds made out. The colonelcy was given to Sir William Scaffington, a retired major in the Grenadier Guards, dated the 9th of May, and he and Captain Curzon kissed the King's hand on the 11th of June to report that they had raised the full complement of men. The regiment paraded in 6 troops on the 4th of July to receive their standards. With the Peace of Amiens, the regiment was disbanded in 1802. 19th century, the regiment was re-raised in September 1803 as the Leicestershire Yeomanry Cavalry. Sir William was still considered the colonel, indicating that this was considered a reformation and not simply a newly raised regiment, and on the 1st of November he resigned the colonelcy and was succeeded by Lieutenant Colonel Keck of Bank Hall. From 1825, when the Rutland Legion was disbanded, the Leicestershire Yeomanry recruited from Rutland as well as Leicestershire. The regiment was mobilised to keep the peace on a number of occasions, such as its service at Derby in October 1831. Workers in the city had rioted after the Reform Bill was rejected by the House of Lords, and the Yeomanry was called in to help the regular army and the Derbyshire Yeomanry maintain order. The regiment was renamed for Prince Albert the Prince Consort in 1844. Second Boer War. The yeomanry was not intended to serve overseas, but due to the string of defeats during Black Week in December 1899, the British government realized they were going to need more troops than just the regular army. A royal warrant was issued on the 24th of December 1899 to allow volunteer forces to serve in the Second Boer War. The royal warrant asked standing yeomanry regiments to provide service companies of approximately 115 men each for the Imperial Yeomanry. The regiment provided the 7th Company for the 4th Battalion and the 65th Company for the 17th Battalion in 1900. In 1901 it was reorganized as mounted infantry as the Leicestershire Imperial Yeomanry. In 1908 it was transferred into the Territorial Force, returning to a cavalry role and equipping as hussars, under the new title of the Leicestershire Yeomanry. First World War. In accordance with the Territorial and Reserve Forces Act 1907, which brought the Territorial Force into being, the TF was intended to be a home defense force for service during wartime, and members could not be compelled to serve outside the country. However, on the outbreak of war on the 4th of August 1914, many members volunteered for Imperial service. Therefore, TF units were split in August and September 1914 into first-line and second-line units. Later, a third line was formed to act as a reserve, providing trained replacements for the first and second-line regiments. 1/1 of a stone Leicestershire Yeomanry. With the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, the regiment mobilised in the North Midland Mounted Brigade and moved to France in November, joining the 3rd Cavalry Division. As such, it was one of only 6 yeomanry regiments to be posted to a regular cavalry division in the war. It saw service at the First Battle of Ypres in 1914 and the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915. At Second Ypres, the regiment gained battle honours for the Battle of St. Julian and, perhaps most notably, the Battle of Frezenberg, where a squadron of the regiment held the line for its entire brigade. Battle of Frezenberg. At Frezenberg, they went into action in the trenches on May 12 as dismounted infantry, numbering 291 all ranks, alongside the 1st Life Guards and 2nd Life Guards. B and C squadrons took up forward positions in the advanced trenches, with a squadron to the rear in support trench. The regiment suffered heavy shell fire through the morning, though with light casualties, until around 6 a.m. The German infantry opposite launched an attack, which was quickly repulsed. Shelling resumed until about 7:30, covering a German infiltration of advanced trenches which had been vacated by the 2nd Life Guards. The Germans began to press on B Squadron, forcing them south and west along the trenches, and driving them back into the C Squadron trench. The squadrons were rallied by the commander of C Squadron, Major Martin, who, the regimental diary records, by his undaunted courage and example got his men to make a great stand against large odds. Martin was killed holding the trench line, and at this point, the survivors remaining in the forward trenches fell back, numbering a lieutenant, the squadron sergeant major, and 14 men. They fell back towards a railway line in the rear, and reached trenches held by the 3rd Dragoon Guards. They remained in the line here until 8 p.m., when the 3rd Dragoon Guards withdrew. A squadron, meanwhile, had held the support trench under strong shell fire until 5:30 a.m., when they began to fall back towards the road behind the trenches. They were met part-way by the regimental commander, Lt. Colonel the Hon. Percy Cecil Evans Freak, the second-in-command and the adjutant. The colonel shouted, "Hold hard, Leicester Yeomanry!" and a squadron halted and returned to the support trench. The colonel was killed directing the defense of the trench, and arranging a post to guard the flank of the 1st Life Guards. Shortly before the attack at 7:30 a.m., this attack was held off by a squadron, and the line stabilized with the Germans digging in close to the trenches. At 8 p.m., a messenger from 7th Cavalry Brigade HQ informed the acting commander that a squadron was the only squadron holding the section of trench originally occupied by 7th Brigade, and that they were to hold the line until a counterattack could be mounted. By the morning of the 13th, 7 officers, including the regimental commander and 2 of 3 squadron commanders, and 87 other ranks had been killed. The unwounded numbered only 92 other ranks. The counterattack, launched the next afternoon at 2:30 p.m. by 8th Cavalry Brigade, was of success. The Yeomanry managed to muster around 40 men, led by the brigade major, for the bayonet charge, and retook some of the trenches formerly held by B Squadron and the Life Guards. Those held by C Squadron had collapsed under heavy fire. The manuscript record of the state of the regiment produced immediately after the battle has been framed and is kept on the wall of the officers' mess of B Squadron in Glenparva, Leicester. After being heavily depleted in 2nd Ypres, the regiment did not see significant action throughout 1916. In 1917, it saw action at the Battle of Arras and the Battle of the Scarpa. In March 1918 it was withdrawn from the division and ordered to reform as a cyclist battalion, later countermanded in in favour of amalgamation with the North Somerset Yeomanry as a machine gun battalion. However, the offensives of 1918 provided a need for cavalry units, and before the regiment could amalgamate, it was remounted and sent to the 3rd Cavalry Brigade of 2nd Cavalry Division, where it was split up to provide reinforcements. One squadron of the regiment was sent to each of the brigade's constituent regiments: C Squadron, light to the 4th Hussars; A Squadron, light to the 5th Lancers; and B Squadron, light to the 16th Lancers. These saw action in the Battle of Amiens, the Battle of the Hindenburg Line, and the pursuit to Mons, for each of which the regiment received a battle honour. 2/1 of a stone Leicestershire Yeomanry. The Second Line Regiment was formed in 1914, and in 1915 it joined the 2/1 of a stone North Midland Mounted Brigade. In October the brigade joined the 1st Mounted Division in Norfolk, replacing the 1st Line Brigade. On the 31st of March 1916, the remaining mounted brigades were ordered to be numbered in a single sequence, and the brigade became the 3rd Mounted Brigade. In July 1916 there was a major reorganization of second-line yeomanry units in the United Kingdom. All but 12 regiments were converted to cyclists, and as a consequence the regiment was dismounted and joined the 3rd Cyclist Brigade in the Holt area. A further reorganization in November 1916 saw the regiment remounted along with the rest of the brigade, which was redesignated as the new 2nd Mounted Brigade in the new 1st Mounted Division at Stansted. By May 1917 it was at Leybourne near West Malling in Kent. The regiment was once again converted to cyclists in August 1917 and joined 12th Cyclist Brigade in the Cyclist Division. By January 1918 it had moved to Canterbury, where it remained until the end of the war. 3/1 of a stone Leicestershire Yeomanry. The 3rd Line Regiment was formed in 1915 and in the summer was affiliated to a reserve cavalry regiment at Aldershot. In the summer of 1916 it was affiliated to the 12th Reserve Cavalry Regiment, also at Aldershot. In early 1917, it was absorbed into the 3rd Reserve Cavalry Regiment, still at Aldershot. Between the wars, post-war, a commission was set up to consider the shape of the territorial force. The experience of the First World War made it clear that cavalry was surfeit. The commission decided that only the 14 most senior regiments were to be retained as cavalry. 8 regiments were converted to armoured car companies of the Royal Tank Corps. 1 was reduced to a battery in another regiment. 1 was absorbed into a local infantry battalion. 1 became a signals regiment, and 2 were disbanded. The remaining 25 regiments were converted to brigades of the Royal Field Artillery between 1920 and 1922. As the 10th most senior regiment in the order of precedence, the regiment was retained as horse cavalry. Second World War. The regiment did not mechanize before the outbreak of the Second World War and continued to train for service as horse cavalry. In early 1939 it was authorized by the War Office to recruit up to its full wartime establishment, and with a heavy drive this was reached in May, with a headquarters squadron and 3 Sabre squadrons. As part of the Cavalry Corps, which by now consisted almost entirely of yeomanry units, it was assigned a wartime role as part of the 6th Cavalry Brigade in the 1st Cavalry Division. However, in the summer of 1939, the divisional organization was slightly reorganized, and the regiment switched roles with the Cheshire Yeomanry to become the Divisional Cavalry Regiment. In late 1939, it was decided to send the division overseas to Palestine, and convert the 7 remaining yeomanry regiments not assigned to the division into artillery regiments. However, a dedicated cavalry regiment was apparently considered surplus to requirements in the cavalry division, and the Leicestershire Yeomanry was removed from its role and assigned for conversion along with the other regiments. It chose the field artillery role, and in early 1940 was split into 2 halves in order to form 2 separate regiments. In February 1940, the first unit was formed in the Royal Artillery as 153rd Field Regiment, Royal Artillery, with the 2nd, 154th Field Regiment, Royal Artillery, forming on the 15th of April 1940. When the Guards Armoured Division was formed in the early autumn of 1941, the 153rd became part of the Guards Support Group. The structure disappeared in the changes of mid-1942, and the 153rd were part of the division as it fought its way across northern France until the German surrender. The 154th was moved to North Africa in 1942, then to Persia and Iraq Command in January 1943 with the 6th Indian Infantry Division. It moved back to North Africa in April and was assigned to the 10th Indian Infantry Division, with which it would serve through the North African Campaign and the Italian Campaign. In July 1945 it was with the British 78th Infantry Division, part of the occupying forces in Austria. Post-war After the war, the regiment reconstituted in the Territorial Army as a yeomanry regiment, under its old title of the Leicestershire Yeomanry, and transferred into the Royal Armoured Corps, whereupon the regiment became a Hussar tank regiment on Comet tanks. In 1952 the Lie were redesignated as an anti-tank regiment, still in EFVs until amalgamation in late 1956. The Leicestershire Yeomanry enjoyed a long and close affiliation with the 7th Queen's Own Hussars, from 1915 to 1956. In 1957 the Leicestershire Yeomanry amalgamated with the Derbyshire Yeomanry, forming the Leicestershire and Derbyshire Yeomanry, and have been affiliated with the 9th 12th Royal Lancers since amalgamation. Battle Honours. The Leicestershire Yeomanry was awarded the following battle honours. Timeline: April to May 1794, raised as the Loyal Leicestershire Volunteer Cavalry. 1802 disbanded. September 1803 re-raised as the Leicestershire Regiment of Yeomanry Cavalry. The 17th of February 1844 given the title the Prince Albert's Own. April 1901-08 Imperial added to title, becoming Prince Albert's Own Leicestershire Imperial Yeomanry. April 1908 transferred to Territorial Force, title Imperial dropped. February 1920 reconstituted in Territorial Army as Leicestershire Yeomanry. November 1939 divided into 153rd Field Regiment (RA) and 154th Field Regiment (RA). January 1947 reconstituted as the Leicestershire Yeomanry, Royal Armoured Corps (TAR). February 1957 amalgamated with the Derbyshire Yeomanry (RAC) to form the Leicestershire and Derbyshire Yeomanry. 1967 reduced to cadre strength. April 1971 re-established as Leicestershire and Derbyshire Yeomanry Squadron, 7th Battalion, Royal Anglian Regiment. Successes: the Leicestershire and Derbyshire Company, 7th Battalion, Royal Anglian Regiment, and B Company, 3rd Battalion, Worcestershire and Sherwood Foresters Regiment. March 1992 B Yeomanry Squadron, Royal Yeomanry, RAC. Uniform: Prior to 1914, officers of the regiment wore in review order a hussar-style uniform comprising a busby with white over scarlet plume, a short dark blue jacket with scarlet collar and cuffs laced and braided in silver, and dark blue overalls with double scarlet stripes. Other ranks substituted a dark blue peaked cap for the busby and white braiding for the silver of the officer's uniform. This elaborate dress continued to be worn between the wars by officers attending court levees and is still worn by the guidon party of the modern B Squadron on ceremonial occasions. Normal service dress for all ranks was khaki from 1903 onwards, initially worn with scarlet facings.